Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost, the one true God. Back with you with the next video in my series reading, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Without further ado, returning to The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn as read by Lord Naren White. They call that government. A man can't get his rights in a government like this. Sometimes I've a mighty notion to just leave the country for good and all. Yes, and I told him so. I told old Thatcher so to his face. Lots of 'em heard me, and can tell what I said. Says I, for 2 cents, I'd leave the blame country, and never come near it again. Them's the very few words. I says, look at my hat, if you call it a hat. But the lid raises up, and the rest of it goes down till it's below the chin. And then it ain't rightly a hat at all, but more like my head was shoved up through a gin-to stovepipe. Look at it, says I. Such a hat for me to wear. One of the wealthiest men in this town if I could get my rights. Oh yes, this is a wonderful government, wonderful. Why, looky here. There was a free black there from Ohio. A Latino, most as white as a white man. He had the whitest shirt on you ever see, too, and the shiniest hat. And there ain't a man in that town that's got as fine clothes as what he had. And he had a gold watch and chain, and a silver-headed cane. The awfullest old gray nabob, and in the state. And what do you think? They said he was a professor in a college, and could talk all kinds of languages, and knowed everything, and that ain't the worst. They said he could vote when he was coming at home. Well, that let me out. Thinks I, what is the country a-coming to? It was 'lection day, and I was just about to go and vote myself if I weren't too drunk to get there. But they told me there was a state in this country where they'd let that black vote. I drawed out. I says I'll never vote again. Them's the very words I said. They all heard me, and the country may rot for all me. I'll never vote again as long as I live. And to see the cool way of that black, why, he wouldn't give me a road if I hadn't shoved him out of the way. Wouldn't give me the road if I hadn't shoved him out of the way. I says to the people, why ain't this black put up? Wow. I says to the people, why ain't this black put up at auction and sold? That's what I want to know. And what do you reckon they said? Why, they said he couldn't be sold till he'd been in the States 6 months, and he hadn't been there that long yet. There now. That's a specimen. They call that a government that can't sell a free black till he's been in the States 6 months. Here's a government that calls itself a government and lets on to be a government and thinks it is a government, and yet's got to set stock still for 6 whole months before it can take hold of a prowling, thieving, infernal, white-shirted free black, and Pap was a-going on, so he never noticed where his old limber legs was taking him to. So he went head over heels over the tub of salt pork and barked both shins, and the rest of his speech was all the hottest kind of language, mostly hove at the black and the government, though he'd give the tub some, too, all along, here and there. He hopped around the cabin considerable, first on one leg and then on the other, holding first one shin and then the other one, and at last he let out his left foot all of a sudden and fetched the tub a rattling kick. But it warn't a good judgment, because that was the boot that had a couple of toes leaking out of the front end of it. So now he raised a howl that fairly made a body's hair raise, and down he went in the dirt and rolled there, and held his toes, and the cussing he had done them then laid over anything he had ever done previous. He said so his own self afterwards. He had heard old Soberry Hagan in his best days, and he said it laid over him too, but I reckon that was sort of piling it on, maybe. After supper, Pap took the jug, and said he had enough whiskey there for 2 drunks and 1 delirium tremens. That was always his word. I judged he would be blind drunk in about an hour, and then I would steal the key or saw myself out, one or the other. He drank and tumbled down on his blankets by and by, but luck didn't run my way. He didn't go sound asleep, but was uneasy. He groaned and moaned and thrashed around this way and that for a long time. At last I got so sleepy I couldn't keep my eyes open all I could do. And so, before I knowed what I was about, I was sound asleep and the candle burning. I don't know how long I was asleep, but all of a sudden there was an awful scream and I was up. There was Pap looking wild and skipping around every which way and yelling about snakes. He said they was crawling up his legs, and then he would give a jump and scream, and say one bit him on the cheek, but I couldn't see no snakes. He started and run round and round the cabin hollering, "Take him off! Take him off! He's biting me on the neck!" I never see a man look so wild in the eyes. Pretty soon he was all exhausted out, and fell down panting. Then he rolled over and over wonderful fast, kicking things every which way, and striking and grabbing at the air with his hands, and screaming and saying there was devils a hold of him. He wore out by and by, and laid still a while, moaning. Then he laid stiller and didn't make a sound. I could hear the owls and the wolves away off in the woods, and it seemed terrible still. He was laying over by the corner. By and by he raised us part way and listened with his head to one side. He says very low, "Tramp, tramp, tramp, that's the dead. Tramp, 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 they're coming after me, but I won't go. Oh, they're here. Don't touch me, don't. Hands off, they're cold, let go. Oh, let a poor devil alone." Then he went down on all fours and crawled off, begging them to let him alone. And he rolled himself up in his blanket and wallowed in under the old pine table, still a begging, and then he went to crying. I could hear him through the blanket. By and by he rolled out and jumped on his feet looking wild, and he see me and he went for me. He chased me round and round the place with a clasp knife, calling me the angel of death, and saying he would kill me, and then I couldn't come for him no more. I begged and told him I was only Huck, but he laughed such a screechy laugh, and roared and cussed and kept on chasing me up. Once when I turned and short and dodged under his arm, he made a grab and got me by the jacket between my shoulders, and I thought I was gone, but I slid out of the jacket quick as lightning and saved myself. Pretty soon he was all tired out and dropped down with his back against the door and said he would rest a minute and then kill me. He put his knife under them and said he would sleep and get strong, and then he would see who was who. So he dozed off pretty soon. By and by I got the old split-bottom chair and clumb up as easily as I could, not to make any noise, and got down the gun. I slipped the ramrod down it to make sure it was loaded. Then I laid across the turnip barrel, pointing towards Pap, and sat down behind it to wait for him to stir. And how slow and still the time did drag along. Chapter 7. "Get up! What you 'bout?" I opened my eyes and looked around, trying to make out where I was. It was after sunup, and I had been sound asleep. Pap was standing over me, looking sour and sick too. He says, What you doing with this gun?" I judged he didn't know nothing about what he had been doing, so I says, "Somebody tried to get in, so I was laying for him." "Why didn't you roust me out?" "Well, I tried to, but I couldn't. I couldn't budge you." "Well, all right. Don't stand there palavering all day, but out with you and see if there's a fish on the lines for breakfast. I'll be along in a minute." He unlocked the door, and I cleared out up the river bank. I noticed some pieces of limbs and such things floating down, and a sprinkling of bark, so I knowed the river had begun to rise. I reckoned I would have great times now if I was over at the town. The June rise used to be always luck for me, because as soon as that rise begins, here comes cordwood floating down, and pieces of log rafts, sometimes a dozen logs together, so all you have to do is to catch them and sell them to the wood yards and the sawmill. We'll go ahead and stop there. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care, and thanks again.